I never believed a story could rot quietly inside a house for years and still smile at the neighbors every morning. I am an old woman now, and when people look at me they see soft hands weathered by work and time. They hear a calm voice and assume peace came easily to me, but peace was earned inch by inch after something unspeakable tried to erase me. I want you to listen carefully, because what I am about to tell you is not a tale meant to shock for entertainment. It is the truth of how survival sometimes begins in the darkest corner of trust. My name is Marlo Henson, and I am 72 years old. I live in a small town outside Asheville, North Carolina, where the mountains soften the horizon and people still greet each other by name. I sell dried herbs and simple remedies at a local market, and most days I am known as the quiet grandma who always has advice and warm tea. What no one guessed for decades is that my smile was learned the hard way, and my strength was born from betrayal that came wrapped in the word family. I raised my son Ethan alone. His father vanished when I was 19 and scared and still learning how to be an adult myself. I worked in a textile warehouse for years, my back bent, my fingers numb, my mind fixed on one promise: that my child would never feel unwanted. I loved him fiercely, maybe too fiercely, because love without boundaries can become something dangerous when it teaches entitlement instead of respect. I did not know that then. I only knew that I would sacrifice anything for my boy. Life moved fast, and then it stopped without warning. One ordinary morning I collapsed at work and woke up in a hospital bed, unable to move half my body. The doctors called it a stroke brought on by exhaustion and stress. I remember staring at the ceiling, listening to machines breathe for me, wondering how a body that carried so much responsibility could fail so suddenly. When I came home, I could not dress myself, cook for myself, or even walk without help. I felt stripped of dignity and terrified of the future. Ethan was 22 at the time, and he promised the world would not abandon me. He said he would care for me, that he would make everything right, that this was his turn to give back. People praised him constantly, neighbors, church friends, even doctors called him devoted. I wanted to believe them, because believing felt safer than questioning. When you are weak, you cling to hope, even when it whispers instead of sings. The days blended together inside that house. I measured time by daylight through the curtains and by footsteps in the hallway. I began to notice that my world was shrinking quietly. Visits stopped, calls were answered for me, and decisions were made without my voice. I told myself it was normal, that I was imagining things, that recovery required patience and trust. But somewhere deep inside a warning bell rang softly, and I ignored it because ignoring felt easier than facing the possibility that the person I loved most might not be the person I thought he was. What I did not understand then is that trauma rarely announces itself with a scream. Sometimes it arrives politely, pretending to help, locking the door gently, and convincing you it is for your own good. That was the beginning of my nightmare, though I did not have the language for it yet. All I knew was that something was wrong, and that my body could not run even if my heart begged it to. I am telling you this now because silence protects the wrong people. Because survival stories do not always start with escape, they start with realization. And because somewhere someone listening may feel that same quiet fear and think they are alone. You are not. This is where my truth begins, and I promise you it does not end in the dark. When your body no longer obeys you, the mind becomes louder. Every sound carries weight, every pause feels suspicious, every kindness arrives with questions attached. In the weeks after my stroke, I told myself recovery was simply slow, that frustration was normal, that dependence was temporary. I repeated those thoughts like prayers because I needed something to hold on to while my muscles lay silent and my days blurred together. At first, Ethan's care looked exactly like what everyone said it was. He lifted me gently, helped me eat, spoke for me when my words came out crooked. He told doctors what they wanted to hear, and they smiled at him with approval. People praised his sacrifice, and I felt guilty for every small discomfort I caused him. Guilt is a powerful leash, especially when you are afraid of becoming a burden. Little things began to change before I understood their meaning. He decided who could visit and when. He said noise made my head hurt. He said conversations tired me out. He answered the phone and told friends I was sleeping or confused. I watched the world pull away inch by inch while he stood between me and everything familiar. I told myself it was temporary, that he was protecting me, that I should be grateful. The house grew quiet in a way that pressed on my chest. The television stayed on, but the sound felt hollow. Days passed without voices besides his. When I asked about church or neighbors, he reminded me how fragile I was, how dangerous stress could be. Fear wears many masks, and one of them looks like concern. I began to doubt my own instincts because he spoke with certainty and I spoke with hesitation. There were moments I tried to assert myself, small moments like asking for privacy or requesting help from someone else. Each time he corrected me gently at first, then firmly. He said outsiders would not understand my condition. He said mistakes could cost me my life. When I pushed back, he sighed as if hurt and reminded me of everything he had given up. His job, his youth, his freedom. I learned quickly that resistance came with consequences, not loud ones, not obvious ones, but a coldness, a withdrawal, a silence that frightened me more than anger. I started noticing how carefully he watched me, how he positioned himself in doorways, how he lingered longer than necessary when helping me. I tried to name the feeling rising in my stomach, but shame blocked the words. Mothers are not supposed to fear their children. That thought alone made me feel sick with myself. So I buried it and told myself I was confused because of the stroke, because of medication, because of age. Nighttime became the hardest. Darkness amplifies thoughts and stillness leaves no room to escape them. I lay awake listening to the house breathe, wondering how a place I had lived in for decades could feel so unfamiliar. I missed ordinary things, pouring my own coffee, choosing my clothes, opening my own door. Independence is invisible until it disappears. I tried to create small defenses, locking my door, changing routines, finding excuses to stay covered. Each act made me feel both safer and more ashamed. I hated myself for taking precautions against my own child, yet my body reacted before my mind could argue. Fear does not wait for logic. What hurt almost as much as the isolation was how convincing he was to everyone else. People admired him. They called him an example. They told me how lucky I was. I smiled because correcting them felt impossible. How do you explain something you are still struggling to admit to yourself? How do you accuse someone the world sees as devoted when you cannot even stand on your own feet? I began to understand then that captivity is not always chains and locked doors. Sometimes it is dependence mixed with doubt wrapped in love. Sometimes it is being made to feel small while being told you are cherished. That realization did not save me yet, but it planted a seed. A quiet, stubborn belief that what was happening was wrong no matter how gently it was disguised. I held on to that belief through long days and longer nights. I did not know how or when, but I promised myself that if a chance appeared, even a small one, I would take it. That promise became my anchor. My world had shrunk to one house, one room, one caregiver, but my will was still alive and waiting. This was the season where I learned that survival often begins long before rescue. It begins the moment you stop blaming yourself for sensing danger. It begins when you allow yourself to think one forbidden thought. Something is not right. Time stopped moving in a way I could measure. Seasons changed outside the window, but inside that house everything felt frozen in the same dim afternoon. I learned the patterns of light on the wall, the sound of cars passing at certain hours, the rhythm of his footsteps. When you are trapped, your mind starts cataloging details as if awareness alone might protect you. I became quieter, not because I had nothing to say, but because speaking felt dangerous. Words could be twisted, misunderstood, used against me later. So I watched instead. I listened. I learned when to ask questions and when to stay silent.
Survival taught me patience in a way nothing else ever had.
My body slowly improved in tiny ways, but my world did not expand with it. Any sign of independence was discouraged. When I suggested therapy, he said it was unnecessary. When I asked about outside help, he reminded me how risky strangers could be. He said I was lucky to have him. That word lucky echoed in my head until it lost meaning. What frightened me most was how normal everything looked from the outside. Trash went out on schedule, groceries arrived on time, bills were paid. Nothing about our life raised alarms unless you looked closely, and no one did. People believe what they expect to see. A devoted son and a recovering mother fit neatly into a story everyone was comfortable with.
Inside me something hardened.
Not anger, not hatred, but clarity. I began to understand that waiting for him to change was useless. I stopped hoping for apologies or explanations. Instead, I focused on endurance and opportunity. I memorized numbers, addresses, names. I rehearsed conversations silently in my head, imagining a moment when someone might truly listen. There were days I almost broke. Days when despair felt heavier than my own body. On those days, I reminded myself of small truths. I was still alive. I still knew right from wrong. What was happening to me was not love, no matter how often that word was used. Holding on to that distinction kept me from disappearing entirely. One afternoon, a neighbor's voice drifted through an open window. It startled me how foreign it sounded. I realized then how long it had been since someone spoke to me without an agenda. That moment sharpened my resolve. Human connection is not a luxury, it is a lifeline. I needed someone else in my world, even briefly. The chance came quietly, not like a rescue scene in a movie, but like a crack in a wall. A routine medical appointment where a new doctor asked different questions. Where for once I was spoken to instead of spoken over. My heart raced as I realized this might be the opening I had been waiting for. Fear almost stopped me. Fear of not being believed, fear of retaliation, fear of being dismissed as confused or ungrateful.
But something stronger rose up beneath it.
A stubborn refusal to let my entire life be defined by silence. When the moment came, I did not give a speech. I did not need to. A look, a pause, a simple answer was enough to change everything. That day did not fix my life. It did not erase the past or instantly restore my body. But it shifted the balance of power for the first time in years. For the first time, someone else saw the cracks I had been living inside. For the first time, I felt the ground move beneath the prison I had learned to survive. Hope did not arrive as joy. It arrived as exhaustion mixed with relief. As the knowledge that I would no longer have to carry the truth alone. Whatever came next would be painful, difficult, uncertain, but it would be real and it would be mine. That was the moment my story turned. Not because everything ended, but because something finally began. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and quiet urgency. Machines hummed softly and footsteps passed my door with practiced speed. I had been in hospitals before after the stroke, but this time felt different. This time I sensed a thin line separating before and after, and I did not know yet which side I would survive on. My heart pounded not from illness, but from the weight of a decision I had already made inside myself. For the first hours everything followed the old pattern. Ethan answered questions before I could form words. He smiled calmly, explained my condition, praised the care he gave at home. Nurses nodded, doctors listened, and I felt the familiar panic rise in my chest. I wondered if I had misjudged my chance, if courage had come too late. Doubt is cruel, like that it shows up right when you need faith the most. Then something unexpected happened. The attending physician, a middle-aged woman with steady eyes, asked him to step outside for a moment. She said it was routine. He resisted politely at first, then insisted on staying. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply repeated the request and waited. Authority does not always shout. Sometimes it just stands still until resistance collapses. When the door closed behind him, the room felt suddenly larger and terrifyingly quiet. I was alone with someone who could help me, and I had no idea how to use my voice anymore. My mouth opened and closed uselessly. Tears welled up not from pain, but from fear that I would fail myself at the final moment. The doctor noticed my distress and pulled a chair close so she could sit at my eye level. She spoke slowly and clearly. She asked yes or no questions. She told me to take my time. She told me I was safe. No one had said that to me in years. When she asked if someone was hurting me at home, my body answered before my mind could interfere. I nodded. When she asked if it was my son, I nodded again. That single movement felt heavier than any step I had taken in physical therapy. What followed was a blur of professionals whose names I barely remember, but whose faces I will never forget. A social worker.
A nurse with kind hands.
A quiet man who spoke in careful tones and explained what would happen next. They did not doubt me. They did not rush me. They treated my fear as evidence, not inconvenience. For the first time since my stroke, I felt seen as a person rather than a problem. Ethan returned, furious, confused, pleading. His voice shifted rapidly from concern to outrage to wounded pride. He accused me of misunderstanding, of being ungrateful, of imagining things because of my condition. Hearing him speak those words in front of others broke something open inside me. I realized then how carefully he had practiced that performance. How often he had relied on my silence to make it believable. Examinations were conducted privately, thoroughly, respectfully. I will not describe them in detail because some truths do not need repetition to remain true. What matters is that the evidence matched my story. That my body carried years of proof even when my voice had been trapped. When the doctor told me they were calling the authorities, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fight was no longer mine alone. The arrest happened quietly.
No dramatic shouting, no spectacle.
Just handcuffs and a stunned look on his face as the image he had built for years collapsed in minutes. I did not feel satisfaction watching him leave. I felt empty and impossibly tired, as if my soul had been holding its breath for a decade and finally exhaled. After that came waiting. Hospital days stretch endlessly when you are exhausted. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying memories, questioning everything, grieving not only what had been done to me but what I had believed my life was. Grief is complicated when the person you mourn is still alive but no longer who you thought they were. I worried about my future constantly. Where would I go? Who would care for me? Would I be placed somewhere unfamiliar, surrounded by strangers? Freedom always carries fear with it, especially when captivity was disguised as safety. Yet even with that fear, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never go back to that house. A distant relative appeared one afternoon, someone I had not seen in decades. She had heard about my case through a friend at the hospital. She spoke gently, offered help without conditions, and did not pressure me for answers or explanations. I cried when she held my hand, not because I was weak, but because kindness felt unfamiliar and overwhelming. Leaving the hospital felt like stepping into a new life while still wearing the scars of the old one. I was fragile, uncertain, and terrified, but I was free. The world did not suddenly become kind or easy. Healing did not rush in with open arms. But the door had closed behind me, and for the first time in years it was locked against the right person. That was the day my suffering became something the light could touch. Not erased, not forgotten, but finally acknowledged. That was the day I stopped surviving in secret and began the long work of reclaiming myself. Freedom does not feel like fireworks when you first touch it. It feels unfamiliar, like walking barefoot on ground you do not yet trust. When I left the hospital, I carried more than a weakened body and a bag of prescriptions. I carried habits of fear, reflexes of silence, and a constant expectation that safety could be taken away without warning. Healing began not as a celebration, but as a careful learning process, almost like childhood all over again. I moved into my cousin Lydia's house on a quiet street lined with old maples. The room she prepared for me was simple: a low bed, a chair by the window, and sunlight that arrived gently every morning. She spoke softly and always asked before helping me. That alone made me cry more times than I can count. Consent, even in the smallest acts, felt revolutionary. The first weeks were difficult. I startled at sounds. I flinched when people came too close. At night, I woke up convinced I was back in that house, trapped again. Lydia never rushed me. She sat with me through the shaking nights, brought warm tea, and reminded me where I was. Safety had to be proven over and over before my body believed it. Physical therapy began slowly. My therapist Hannah was patient, firm, and endlessly encouraging. She treated my body like something capable, not broken. Progress came in inches, then centimeters, then steps. The first time my fingers moved on their own, I cried harder than I had the day I was freed. That movement was not just physical. It was proof that my life could still respond to effort and care. Therapy for my mind ran alongside therapy for my body. Talking was exhausting at first. Naming things made them real, and reality hurt. But each session untangled a knot. I learned that what happened to me had a name. That my fear was rational. That survival responses are not weakness, they are intelligence in action. I stopped asking myself why I did not fight harder and started asking how I endured so long. As strength returned, my world widened. I walked to the end of the block, then to the corner, then to a small park where children played. Life moved forward without knowing what it had almost lost. I watched people laugh, argue, hurry, and I felt strangely grateful just to witness it freely.
I knew I could never return to factory work.
My body would not allow it. That realization frightened me until Lydia suggested something unexpected. She reminded me how I had always loved plants, how I used to make teas and balms for neighbors long before everything fell apart. She encouraged me to learn more, not as a hobby, but as a new path. The classes were small, held in a community center room that smelled of dried leaves and wood. I learned names, properties, preparation methods. I discovered that healing is not just something we receive, but something we can give. Working with herbs grounded me. Plants do not rush. They do not judge. They grow at their own pace and teach patience by example. Months passed and confidence grew quietly. I rented a tiny stall at a local market. At first I barely spoke, above a whisper. Then people asked questions. Then they came back. Word spread slowly, not because of advertising, but because care has a way of traveling on its own. Financial independence returned piece by piece. So did dignity. I made decisions again. I set my own schedule.
I locked and unlocked my own door.
These ordinary actions felt extraordinary after years of having them taken away. I followed the court proceedings from a distance. Justice moved slower than pain, but it moved. Sentencing day did not bring closure. Closure is a myth we tell ourselves to survive. What it brought was confirmation that the truth mattered. That my life mattered. That silence had not been my destiny. I began speaking at small gatherings, sharing parts of my story when I felt ready. Other women listened with wide eyes and quiet nods. Some cried. Some stayed behind afterward to talk. Helping them helped me. Purpose stitched together the places where damage had torn me apart. By the time I opened my own small shop near the town square, I no longer introduced myself as a victim, even inside my own head. I was a survivor, a healer, a woman still learning how to live without fear dictating every choice. Part 5 of my life was not about revenge or triumph. It was about rebuilding slowly, honestly, and on my own terms. It was about choosing myself every day even when that choice felt uncomfortable. And it taught me something I want you to remember. Recovery is not about returning to who you were before. It is about becoming someone who knows their worth and refuses to give it away again. Years passed the way rivers do after a storm, quietly reshaping the land without asking permission. I grew older, but not smaller. My days filled with ordinary miracles, opening the shop at dawn, arranging jars by scent and color, listening to people talk about their aches, their worries, their hopes. I learned that pain softens when it is shared, and that purpose is the most reliable medicine I have ever known. My body never returned to what it once was, and that was fine. It returned to enough. Enough strength to walk to work.
Enough balance to stand behind the counter.
Enough steadiness to look people in the eye and speak without shaking. Independence came back dressed as routine, and I welcomed it. I built a circle that felt like family, chosen, not assigned. Lydia remained my anchor. Friends from the market checked in on me. A gentle widower named Samuel entered my life not as a rescuer but as a companion. He listened without trying to fix. He waited without demanding. Love later in life is quieter, and that is its gift. For a long time I believed the story had ended where justice began. I believed distance would protect me and that memory would fade into something manageable. I was wrong about one thing. Some chapters return asking to be acknowledged, not reopened. One afternoon the bell above my shop door rang and time folded in on itself. The man standing there was thinner, grayer, leaning on a cane, his eyes restless. It took a second to recognize him because sickness had hollowed him out, but recognition came all the same. Ethan stood in front of me, fragile and desperate, wearing fear like a borrowed coat. He spoke softly, asking for help, explaining his illness, listing losses as if they were credentials. He said doctors warned him about decline. He said he had no one. He said family should forgive. I listened without interrupting, because silence was no longer a weapon against me, it was a choice. I felt something surprising then, not rage, not satisfaction, not pity. I felt clarity.
Clear as cold water.
The past did not rush back to drown me. It stood still, waiting for my answer. When I spoke, my voice was steady. I told him I understood what dependence feels like. I told him I knew the terror of needing care and the vulnerability of trust. I told him I would not be his solution. Not because I wished him harm, but because boundaries are not cruelty, they are survival. He tried to bargain with memory, with blood, with religion, with reputation. None of it moved me. I told him that forgiveness is not access and love does not erase accountability. I told him to seek help where help is given without the price of silence. I asked him to leave. When the door closed behind him, my hands trembled for a moment, then stilled. I sat down, breathed deeply, and felt the weight lift the way it does when you finally put down something you were never meant to carry. Later I cried, but not from sorrow. I cried from release. From knowing I had chosen myself without apology. From realizing that power does not always roar, sometimes it whispers a single word and means it. No. Today I am an old woman who knows the shape of her life. I know what was taken and what was rebuilt. I know that survival is not linear and courage does not always look brave. I know that silence can be broken and that healing can arrive late and still be real. If you are listening and you feel trapped, unheard, or unsure, believe me when I tell you this. Your body knows the truth even when your voice is tired. Help can come from unexpected places. And it is never too late to choose dignity. This is my story not because it defines me, but because it no longer owns me.
I am still here. I am still standing. and my life belongs to me.